Okay, good afternoon or morning, whenever you're doing this. So, obviously, in the past, I've been setting you lots of work on Show My Homework. I'm going to continue doing that, but I thought just to try and make things just that little bit more interactive, give you a little bit of a chance to try and learn things in a slightly different way rather than just reading and answering questions. What I'm going to start doing for you is making these little videos. So, for each lesson we do, I'm going to make you a little video just to talk you through the tasks and give you a little bit more information, just so it's a little bit more like it would be in a real lesson. Okay, and hopefully we'll try and get some Teams discussions and things happening as well in the coming weeks. Obviously, we're going to be doing this for a while, so we've got plenty of time to try and experiment and find some new ways to do things. So today's lesson, we are going to be looking at the first kind of major event, really, I suppose, where the Nazi Party clashes with the Weimar Republic, and he tries to take power forcibly in an event called the Munich Putsch, also sometimes called the Beer Hall Putsch. So before we start having a look at that, and it is a pretty exciting story, but before we start looking at what happened there, what I'm going to ask you to do is just complete a little quiz on the content you did last week. So you had a little look at the Nazi Party's kind of beginnings, how Hitler got involved with it, and what some of their key beliefs were. I'm going to ask you just to take a quiz on quizzes to help you go through that work. Okay, so if you just use the details here, so it's this code to take the quiz, or there's just the link if that's easier. So the first thing I want you to do is take that quiz, and what I'd like you to do, boys, is keep doing it until you can get full marks. All right, don't just give it one go and sort of be like, oh, that'll do. Keep going until you can get 100%. And obviously, if you get 100% the first time, good for you, all right? But I want you to make sure you've got 100% on that quiz before you do anything else. Okay, so as I say, this is kind of the first time in our course that the Weimar Republic and the Nazis come head to head. All right, because effectively the way we've taught this is kind of as two stories, two strands of a story. We've been looking at the Weimar Republic since Christmas. We've looked at how they started, kind of how they were formed, how they were set up, the major kind of problems that they went through for the first 10 years of their time in power, and we've looked at what's going on purely from their perspective. What we've done last week is we've tried to kind of catch up with that story from the Nazi perspective. So while the Weimar Republic is being set up, they're forming their constitution, they're dealing with those early problems, the Nazi Party is kind of growing behind the scenes and becoming more of a force. So today, for the first time, 1923, those two stories are going to collide. Okay, the story of the Nazis, the story of the Weimar Republic, for the first time, they are going to come head to head and they are going to clash. Okay, so before we look at what happens, I want you to spend a little bit of time just recapping and revising some of that content we've already done. So you've got two questions, okay? One is very easy because you did it last week. One is a little bit more difficult because it's been a little while since we did the Weimar Republic. And what I want you to do is in your book, pause this video, and for each of these headings, so perhaps do a mind map for each, I want you to try and get down as much as you can remember. Okay, so what position was the Weimar Republic in by 1923? So we're talking the autumn, so November. And what position was the Nazi Party in by 1923? So I'd like you to do some mind mapping, some spider diagrams for each of those questions. Pause the video to do that, and then when you're ready, start the video up again, and I'm going to talk you through some of the things you should have written down and allow you to add them to your mind maps. Okay, so pause the video now and do a little mind map to recap each of those two questions. Okay, so start the video again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through some of the things hopefully you've thought of and added to those mind maps, and you're going to use this opportunity to add anything you have missed. So we'll start with the Weimar Republic. Now, by November 1923, we know they are not doing so good. All right, things are not looking great for the Weimar Republic in 23. That's pre-Stresemann, so everything is really going down the toilet at this stage. Okay, number one. Okay, we've got all those problems related to the aftermath of the war. Okay, they signed the armistice in 1918. Bad move number one. All the nationalists, the right-wingers, livid. All right, calling them the November criminals for betraying the country, stabbing them in the back by signing that armistice. Whether it's true or not, that was what a lot of people believed. And then, of course, the following year, 1919, they then signed the Treaty of Versailles. okay, which obviously is humiliating, crippling, really, really horrible treaty as far as the Germans were concerned. And they saw that as yet another betrayal from the November criminals. Yet again, they were bowing down to the wishes of the Allies and hurting Germany in doing so. Okay, so obviously you've got those enormous reparations that they have to pay, the restrictions to the army, cutting it down to 100,000 men, 6 battleships, no air force, no heavy artillery, no conscription. To the extent they cannot even defend themselves as a country, all of that imperial militaristic culture completely kind of laughed at, losing all that territory, and as I say, this kind of this theory, this myth that they stabbed the army in the back. So we've got all of that going on. We've also got lots and lots and lots of political violence, a lot of it being a kind of a legacy of all of this. So, first of all, of course, we've got the Spartacists, the communists who tried to have a revolution and seize power that started in 1919. The only way in which the Weimar Republic survives that is thanks to the right-wing Freikorps coming in and finishing the job for them. Okay, a little bit later on, they have to start dismantling the army. The Putsch get upset, okay, and we see the Freikorps rising up this time, okay, led by Dr. Wolfgang Kapp in 1920. And in that case, again, the Republic had to be rescued. They were only saved by a general strike led by the people of Berlin. So in both cases, there was a pretty major attempt to kind of overthrow the government. In both cases, the government was not able to protect itself. It had to turn to outside forces. In fact, the Spartacists, they had to turn to the right wing to deal with them, and then the Putsch, they had to turn to the workers, they had to turn to the left wing. So essentially, they're playing both sides off against each other. It's the only way they're surviving. Not making them look great, I have to say. The other unfortunate legacy of all of this violence is a hell of a lot of political assassinations. Now, this has kind of begun, really, with the Spartacist revolt. So if you remember, the Freikorps, even without even an order from Ebert, murder the 2 leaders of the Spartacists, so Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. They are both brutally murdered without warrant, and that normalises political violence because there is no punishment. The soldiers involved who carried out those murders are not punished. They are not, they're not really, there's no reprimand at all. They just completely get away with it. So because of that, we see a huge amount more political assassinations, 376. Okay, one of which, of course, is Matthias Erzberger, who signed the armistice. And the big problem with those is that it's not just that people are being murdered left, right, and centre. It's the fact that when a right-wing politician carries out a murder, so let's say a left-wing politician, such as Matthias Erzberger, is murdered, the courts let them off. Okay, the right-wing assassins are let off because the courts are biased in favour of the right wing. The judiciary, the judges, are basically against the Weimar Republic. They are the civil service left behind by the Kaiser. Okay, they left them there. Ebert did that deliberately to ensure stability, but unfortunately, by leaving all those old judges from the Kaiser's reign, it just ensured a massive right-wing bias. The big problem, of course, by 1923 November, is let alone all this, they're in the midst of absolutely crippling hyperinflation. Okay, the French have invaded the Ruhr early that year. They've attempted passive resistance. They've all gone on strike, but they've kept paying them, and in doing so, they've just printed off more and more money. People have lost their entire life savings. There are shortages because Germany can't trade because their currency is not worth anything. And people are really suffering. And in particular, it is the middle classes that are suffering. And of course, the problem with that is they are the key support base of the Weimar Republic. They are the moderates. They're the people that support democracy. And they're the ones who own businesses and have savings accounts, who have lost everything in this hyperinflation. So it's a really big issue. They're losing their key support base, and the Weimar government seems completely powerless to respond to this. Obviously, we know that Stresemann does eventually sort it out, but in November 1923, it was rock bottom, and all the government could do was print more money. So people were like, wow, this government are no good. They are not helping us. So that's where the Weimar Republic is by November 1923. Pretty bad position, the weakest they ever have been, really. In contrast, how are the Nazi Party doing? The National Socialist German Workers' Party. How are they getting on? Well, they've got Adolf Hitler in place as their leader. Okay, obviously prior to that they were just called the German Workers' Party, the DAP. They only had a handful of members. Hitler's come soaring in. Okay, he's added National Socialist to that party name. He's brought in the swastika the logo that we all know so well. He's brought in the salute, the Nazi salute, and he has ended up becoming the leader himself. All right, he's an incredible speaker, an incredible orator. He's the star. He attracts thousands to their meetings, and he has massively broadened their appeal. They've also got a various other number of key figures in position, one of which being this guy here, Ernst Röhm. Okay, he's an ex-soldier and he is head of the SA, the Sturmabteilung. These are the military units that support the Nazi party. There they are, also known as the brown shirts, because what they wear is basically they wear the uniforms that can be got cheaply, the old army uniforms. And those uniforms were previously used in Africa in World War I, so they're brown. So that's why they wear brown shirts. So they're called the brown shirts. Essentially, they are a gang of armed thugs, okay, made up of unemployed young men who haven't got much better to do. They go round breaking up other groups' meetings, handing out leaflets, basically, as doing the bidding of the Nazi party. And they are led by Röhm, who is one of Hitler's close friends. We've also got this guy, Julius Streicher, in position. He is another right-wing figure who brought an awful lot of appeal to the party. He is in charge of the Nazi newspaper, or one of them, which is called Der Stürmer, the Storm. Now, Der Stürmer is effectively like a tabloid. You know, something like the Sun or the Mirror that has that red bar at the top. Effectively, it's one of those, which means it's very, very sensationalist, okay? It's not particularly serious. It's really extreme in its views. So it's got a circulation of about 1,400 copies, so a lot of people read it, and it's very anti-Jewish, very anti-democracy, very extreme in its views. And they've also got something else that's a little bit more serious called the People's Observer, which would be the equivalent of something like the Times. We've got Hess. He's also a war hero. He's an academic. He's one of Hitler's kind of right-hand men. And finally, we've got Goering, Hermann Goering. He was a dashing war hero. Again, he was a pilot in World War I. So, in fact, what all these men have in common, including Hitler, is they all served in the army in World War I. Okay, so they're all war heroes, and they're all obviously very right-wing. Membership has absolutely exploded. We've gone from 3,000 to 50,000, so huge membership, largely due to the efforts of Hitler. Okay, they've got a very strong support base, particularly in Bavaria. So if you look, this is a map of the states of Germany. This is Bavaria down the bottom. Okay, there's Berlin up here. Okay, and Bavaria, the capital of which is Munich. Now, this is where the Nazis are based. Okay, this state here. They're very, very strong here, and they are starting to spread. Okay, and finally, they've got a clear programme laid out in that 25-point programme that you would have had a look at for your work last week. Okay, they're very nationalist, very anti-democracy, anti-Weimar, very big fans of the whole stab-in-the-back myth, anti-Jewish, anti-communist. Those beliefs are really laid out very, very strongly, and everyone knows what the Nazis are about. So the Weimar Republic are at their weakest, and the Nazis are the strongest they've ever been. All right, they've been a party only for a few years, but they've managed to get 50,000 members and a huge degree of support, particularly in Bavaria. So that's the situation of both the two sides, and there's a few other little contextual details that are pretty useful as well. Number one being, the Nazi party are very heavily influenced by a man called Mussolini. Okay, he is an Italian dictator. Okay, he led the Italian fascist party called the Black Shirts, who you can see a little bit in this picture. This is in the way a bit, unfortunately. Now, Mussolini was a big inspiration to Hitler at this time. They had the flags, the military uniforms, the salutes. Hitler and the Nazi party, they're a few years behind the fascists, and they are really, really look up to them for inspiration. In 1922, so the previous year, Mussolini took his black shirts, his paramilitary, the equivalent of the SA, and he marched on Rome and forced the Italians to let him be the leader. So they had a democracy in Italy, but Mussolini came barging in with the black shirts and they gave it up to him. So that's been happening elsewhere in Europe at the same time. Meanwhile, we've got a guy called von Kahr. You can see the picture a bit clearly on the PowerPoint. Unfortunately, it's covered by this. He's the head of Bavarian government, and he's not all that keen on the Weimar politicians. All right, he's not a particularly moderate politician. He doesn't really agree with the Weimar Republic, which means he's actually turning a bit of a blind eye to a lot of what the SA have been doing. As I said, they're basically thugs. They've been beating people up, causing trouble, and the Bavarian state officials have kind of just let it happen, because actually they agree with a lot of what the Nazis want. So bearing in mind all of this, imagine you're Hitler. What should you do? This is the situation. What would be the obvious course of action? take power. Obviously, all right? Come on, look at the situation. You're your strongest, the government are at their weakest, your local Bavarian government are on your side. You've just watched your hero, Mussolini, manage to force his way to power over in Italy. Now's your time. All right, so Hitler decides, November 1923, the time has come for the Nazi Party to take over Germany, and he's going to do it by force. He's got an enormous army of thugs, the SA, the Sturmabteilung, and he is going to use them to forcibly take power. Okay, so what I'd like to do, guys, is in your book, could you just write an answer to this question and just explain what we've just been talking about? So why in 1923 does Hitler decide to make his bid for power? Why is this his moment? And I want you to make sure you include, firstly, what the Weimar Republic are doing at this point. So what is their position in 1923? What is the position of the Nazis in 1923? So the corresponding position for them. What's been happening in Italy? So what's Mussolini been getting up to that is really inspiring Hitler? And finally, what is it about the attitude of the Bavarian government that means that this is a convenient time for Hitler to try and realise those ambitions? Okay, so if you could write that answer in your book, I'd expect probably about a paragraph, please, and try and make sure you've covered all of these bullet points because they're all pretty important. Obviously, you can rewind this video to go back over things. I've given you the PowerPoint as well, so just go back over it as many times as you need to make this a really good, detailed answer. And when you're ready, you can start the video back up and watch the next bit. Okay, so November 1923, the 9th of November, which is an interesting date because that's also the date the Kaiser abdicated. And as this course goes on, as does the Cold War course in year 10, you'll realise the 9th of November is a pretty important date in German history. But anyway, 9th of November 1923, Hitler decides he's going to take power by force. Okay, now, a big thing that happens in Bavaria, okay, is this. So you may have heard of something called Oktoberfest, which happens in Germany every year. That's a very Bavarian tradition, okay? They wear lederhosen. And rather than going to pubs in Bavaria, they go to these sorts of things. They're called beer halls. Okay, and what they are big long tables where everybody sits and drinks and sort of gets drunk and has fun. And that's kind of their equivalent of the English pub. So that's why this putsch, this revolt, is also sometimes called the beer hall putsch, because a lot of what happens takes place in one of these beer halls. Okay, so essentially Hitler has a three-stage plan for his seizure of power. That night, 9th of November, he bursts into a beer hall with a gun and begins. Okay, that night there is a meeting of the leading Bavarian politicians in Munich. Okay, he bursts in with a gun and he decides he's going to convince them to support him. The next morning, he's going to march on Munich using the SA, all right, to take control and then take control of Bavaria. And then when he's done that, the plan is march to Berlin, take control of the whole of Germany and overthrow the Weimar Republic. Now, spoiler alert, you may know Hitler doesn't take power in Germany for another 10 years. So this isn't going to go very well. Okay, but today we're going to have a look at the events of what happens, try and think about why it goes so wrong, and then next lesson we're going to have a look at whether actually it really was such a failure for Hitler. But first of all, we're going to watch a clip. This is from a TV show called The Rise of Evil. If you've got a bit of time, it is all on YouTube. I would really recommend watching it, actually, because it's a really good film about the sort of story of Hitler's life. So I would recommend checking that out, but we're going to watch a clip from it now to find out what happens when Hitler chooses to take power.
I'll confront Carr here. Röhm and his men wait here. We surround the barracks, then attack. Once the situation is secure, I'll telephone Röhm here at the beer hall.
Half of my men will cut the lines at the telephone exchange. The rest of us will secure the military barracks.
No information, in or out of Munich, unless I say so. Gentlemen, I know this is often said and deeply felt, but none more deeply than tonight. May God and the people of Germany be with us.
Brothers, you and I, together, we will make history.
Your papers, please. couldn't sleep last night worrying about this speech. His popularity's rising. If people don't hear the truth...
Don't worry, they will. Tonight we unify the other parties and put an end to Adolf Hitler.
The suckers rule, and I'm the lion tamer, an all-or-nothing savage autocrat. I crack my whip, the king of all the jungle just starts to burn like he's my pussycat. But smell the stench, can't escape the jungle, and though at peace, the animals still roar. Those darling beasts, they long to slay each other, only my whip keeps them from going to war. They grown a tough.
Gentlemen, history has brought us to the edge of chaos. And now we have a choice.
Men act like beasts, beasts act like men. They both need training now and then.
Or we can, with courage and faith, leap.
What's drumming? What's coming?
The National Revolution has begun. The building is surrounded. No one may leave. Any trouble, you will be shot. Inside. Inside! Stay calm. Remain in your places. We have the building surrounded.
Get me a Ludendorff.
Sorry to surprise you like this, but then you're no stranger to intrigue, are you? I'm forming a provisional Reich government. I will be in charge of the police. General Ludendorff will be in charge of the army. And I will have a post for each of you. I need your support.
You seem to have planned this well. Then where is General Ludendorff? If he supports you as you say he does, why is he not here?
Oh, so the little man pulled it off, did he? Give me a moment.
Keep your head!
He's a little late.
What's going on? You sure he's coming at all?
Shut up! Take your seats! Remain calm!
He's here.
Your leaders are with us! Will you join them? Will you stand behind us? The German Revolution begins tonight!
Yes. Good.
There's an armed group heading towards the barracks.
What do you mean they fell back? Can't believe this is happening! Nobody does anything right! That's your conscience. Conscience. A Jewish invention, sir. Conscience.
Do you mind if we visit our wives, General? They'll be worried.
Of course. Mustn't worry. The poor women.
Mobilize the army. Now. What the hell's happening?
There are too many of them. Somebody must have betrayed us.
What are you doing here? Where's Carr and the others?
Oh, I let them go. Their wives were a concern. Well, that's all right. They gave me their word they would notify the authorities.
Good God! Follow me!
Let's go.
We'll take to the streets! We'll take to the streets! We'll go to the war ministry. There were 8,000 people at the Circus Krona the other night. As soon as they know what's happening, they will support us!
Okay, so that's dramatised the events for you. What I would now like you to do is use the cards that I've attached to show my homework, and you can print them off and cut them out, or if necessary you're going to need to copy them, depending on what kind of access you have at home to a printer and things. So just do whichever of those options is best for you, printing them or copying. And what I'd like you to do is use those cards to create a flowchart in your book showing the events of the Munich Putsch, or the Beer Hall Putsch as it is sometimes known. Okay, so that in your book you have a nice little flowchart showing you the stories of what happens, and then next lesson we can have a look at the consequences, and hopefully you'll all know it pretty well. Next lesson we'll start with another quiz on the events of this, so please make sure you get them in the right order. I will post the answers on Show My Homework for you, just so you can check them when you're done. Okay, so I'll stop the video there, alright, because I've talked you through what I need to. You just got that one task to do now. I hope it was helpful. Obviously, drop me an email if you're stuck on anything, and I'll see you next time.